Not enough on its own. I love the drums, the bass, and all sorts of other instruments, but they...
When people think of David Gilmour, they think of the master of melodic guitar solos, the Pink Floyd legend whose soaring leads on songs like Comfortably Numb defined an era, the quiet perfectionist who helped create some of rock's most atmospheric and emotional soundscapes.
You are only coming through in waves.
But behind the calm, collected exterior and diplomatic public persona lies a musician with surprisingly strong opinions about bands he considers technically inadequate or artistically bankrupt.
We had so little time to do it, and half the days we had in the studio we were doing other things.
While many guitar legends maintain respectful relationships with their peers, Gilmour's pursuit of musical excellence and his dedication to emotional authenticity have occasionally revealed deep frustrations with artists he views as charlatans or posers. "Music should move people, not just make noise," he once told Guitar World magazine. There's a difference between playing fast and playing with purpose. From dismissive comments about punk rockers to quiet disdain for prog rock pretenders, Gilmour's musical antipathies reflect the standards of a perfectionist who believes technique should serve emotion, not replace it. His criticisms aren't personal attacks. They're the assessments of a craftsman who's spent decades perfecting his art and has little patience for those who haven't. Today, we're counting down the 6 bands that David Gilmour reportedly can't stand, and why even some of rock's biggest names have failed to earn the respect of one of guitar's most influential voices. Band number 6, Limp Bizkit. Few bands have triggered David Gilmour's contempt quite like nu metal pioneers Limp Bizkit, a group that industry insiders say represents everything the Floyd legend believes went wrong with rock music in the late 1990s.
I'll spin your ass wrong. Then if my day keeps going this way, I just might.
David views Limp Bizkit as the logical endpoint of rock's devolution, explained a former EMI executive who worked with both Pink Floyd and Interscope during this era. He sees them as having taken all the aggression of punk and metal, but removed any musical sophistication or emotional depth. Gilmour's disdain first became apparent during interviews promoting Pink Floyd's later work, when journalists would ask about contemporary rock bands. According to a Rolling Stone journalist who covered both acts, Gilmour's dismissal of Fred Durst and company was swift. When Limp Bizkit was mentioned as an example of rock's evolution, David's response was something like, "Evolution implies improvement. This feels more like devolution disguised as energy." What particularly bothered Gilmour was nu metal's approach to guitar work. During sessions for his solo material in the early 2000s, engineer Andy Jackson recalled Gilmour's frustration after hearing break stuff on a radio in the studio. He just shook his head and said, "When did we decide that rhythm was more important than melody? A guitar isn't just a percussion instrument with strings." The tension became more evident when both Pink Floyd and Limp Bizkit were considered for major festival headlining slots. According to a festival promoter who worked with both acts, Gilmour's reaction to sharing billing was diplomatically hostile. He never said he wouldn't play the same event, but he made it clear that he didn't consider what they did to be in the same category as actual music. Band number 5. Kiss. David Gilmour's reported antipathy toward Kiss stems from what those close to him describe as fundamental disagreements about the purpose of rock music and the role of spectacle versus substance in live performance. David has always believed music should be about emotional connection, not visual distraction, revealed former Pink Floyd lighting designer Mark Brickman. He saw Kiss as everything wrong with rock's emphasis on theatrics over actual musical content. The tension allegedly began in the mid-1970s when both Pink Floyd and Kiss were establishing themselves as major arena acts with vastly different approaches. According to a former Columbia Records executive, Gilmour's reaction to Kiss's theatrical approach was immediate and dismissive. He called them a circus act with guitars and questioned whether audiences were coming for the music or just the pyrotechnics. What particularly frustrated Gilmour was the comparison between Pink Floyd's sophisticated stage productions and Kiss's more bombastic approach. During planning sessions for The Wall tour, production manager Robbie Williams recalled Gilmour's insistence on musical integrity. He said something like, "Our effects should enhance the emotional impact of the songs, not replace them. We're not here to distract people from bad music with good explosions." The animosity became more evident when both bands were touring extensively in the late 1970s. According to a venue manager who worked with both acts, Gilmour was particularly critical of Kiss's audience interaction. He allegedly said that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were selling a fantasy of rock stardom instead of actual rock music, and that when your biggest moments don't involve playing instruments, you might be in the wrong business. Band number 4. Yes. One of Gilmour's most surprising musical antipathies centers on progressive rock legends. Yes, a band whose technical virtuosity and complex compositions represent an approach to prog that allegedly conflicts with his more emotionally driven philosophy.
Shout to the women to sing, 'cause they produce the movement.
David always felt Yes represented prog rock's worst tendencies, explained former Pink Floyd keyboardist Rick Wright in a rare 2007 interview. He believed they prioritized technical showboating over emotional connection, which was completely opposite to Floyd's approach to progressive music. The tension allegedly stems from the early 1970s, when both bands were helping define what progressive rock could become. According to former Atlantic Records A&R executive Phil Carson, Gilmour's criticism of Yes was immediate and pointed. He said they were playing musical mathematics instead of actual music, and that complexity without emotion is just academic exercise. What particularly irritated Gilmour was Yes's approach to guitar work, especially Steve Howe's technical prowess. During Pink Floyd recording sessions, engineer Alan Parsons recalled Gilmour's frustration when comparisons were made. David would say things like, "Anyone can learn to play fast. The trick is learning when not to play at all. Every note should have a reason for existing." The animosity deepened when prog critics began comparing the two bands' approaches to extended compositions. According to a Melody Maker journalist who covered both acts, Gilmour's assessment was characteristically measured but cutting. When asked about Yes's influence on progressive rock, he said something about the difference between being progressive and being pretentious, and that long doesn't automatically mean important. Band number 3. Rush. David Gilmour's disdain for Canadian prog rock titans Rush represents one of his most intellectually driven musical antipathies. A fundamental disagreement about whether technical virtuosity should serve the song or become the song itself. David always saw Rush as talented musicians making music primarily for other musicians, revealed former Pink Floyd producer Bob Ezrin, who ironically also worked with Rush. He believed they were so focused on impressing people with their abilities that they forgot to actually move them emotionally. The tension allegedly began in the late 1970s when Rush was gaining critical acclaim for their complex compositions and Neil Peart's legendary drumming. According to a former Capitol Records executive, Gilmour's reaction to their growing reputation was immediate and harsh. He called them a conservatory exercise masquerading as rock music, and questioned whether playing everything perfectly but feeling nothing was really an achievement. What particularly frustrated Gilmour was the way guitar magazines praised Alex Lifeson's technical work, while, in his view, ignoring the emotional content. During sessions for The Wall, engineer James Guthrie recalled Gilmour's commentary after hearing a Rush track. He said something like, "They can play circles around most bands, but can they make you cry? Can they make you feel anything other than impressed? That's the real test." The animosity became more evident when both bands were touring major arenas in the early 1980s. According to a venue sound engineer who worked with both acts, Gilmour was particularly critical of Rush's live approach. David allegedly said that watching Rush was like attending a masterclass instead of a rock concert, and that audiences shouldn't need a music degree to appreciate a performance. Band number 2, Genesis, post-Peter Gabriel. David Gilmour's reported hatred for Genesis's Phil Collins era represents his broader frustration with progressive rock's evolution toward commercial accessibility, a transformation he allegedly viewed as the betrayal of everything prog rock originally stood for. David saw Phil Collins-era Genesis as the death of progressive rock's integrity, explained former Pink Floyd manager Steve O'Rourke. He believed they'd traded their artistic soul for commercial success and dragged the entire genre down with them. The animosity allegedly began in the early 1980s when Genesis achieved massive commercial success with their simplified, pop-oriented approach. According to a former Virgin Records executive, Gilmour's reaction to their transformation was immediate and hostile. He called it the lobotomization of progressive rock, and said Phil Collins had turned one of Britain's most adventurous bands into a drum machine with a marketing strategy. What particularly infuriated Gilmour was the critical acclaim Genesis received for their commercial period. During Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason sessions, producer Bob Ezrin recalled Gilmour's tirade after hearing Invisible Touch on the radio. He went off about how they were being praised for dumbing down their music to the lowest common denominator, and that progressive should mean moving forward, not moving toward the middle of the road. The tension reached its peak when both bands were competing for radio airplay in the mid-1980s. According to a BBC radio programmer who worked with both acts, Gilmour's assessment of Genesis's new direction was particularly harsh. He allegedly said that Phil Collins had taken a band that once challenged listeners and turned them into background music for shopping centers, and that artistic evolution doesn't mean artistic devolution. Band number 1, the Ramones. The most surprising and intense of David Gilmour's musical hatreds centers on punk pioneers. The Ramones, a band whose minimalist approach and deliberate rejection of musical sophistication represents everything the Floyd guitarist allegedly stands against. David's contempt for the Ramones went beyond musical differences, revealed former Pink Floyd sound engineer Andy Jackson. He saw them as actively destroying everything he and Pink Floyd had worked to achieve in rock music. The complexity, the emotion, the craftsmanship. The animosity allegedly began in 1976 when the Ramones burst onto the scene with their stripped-down, three-chord approach to rock music. According to a former CBS Records executive who worked with both acts, Gilmour's reaction was immediate and devastating. He called them musical vandals and said they were trying to convince people that ignorance was somehow more authentic than knowledge. What particularly infuriated Gilmour was the Ramones' influence on younger musicians. During Pink Floyd's Animals recording sessions, producer Bob Ezrin recalled Gilmour's growing frustration with punk's anti-technical ethos. He said something like, "They're teaching kids that learning your instrument is selling out, that trying to improve is somehow dishonest. That's not rebellion. That's anti-intellectualism disguised as authenticity." The tension reached nuclear levels when punk advocates began dismissing progressive rock as pretentious dinosaur music. According to former Floyd manager Steve O'Rourke, Gilmour's response was uncharacteristically personal. He took it as a direct attack on everything he believed music should be. He said the Ramones were celebrating mediocrity and turning rock and roll into a race to the bottom. Even decades later, Gilmour's assessment remained unchanged. During a 2015 interview when asked about punk's influence on rock history, his response was diplomatically brutal. Some movements push music forward by exploring new possibilities. Others push it backward by deliberately limiting possibilities. The Ramones convinced a generation that less was more, when sometimes less is just less. What do you think about these alleged feuds? Did any surprise you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into progressive rock's most refined rivalries, smash that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from music's greatest perfectionists. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads.